He thought he was only coming home to say goodbye to his grandfather. But at the funeral, beneath the quiet hymns and folded flags, a loyal German shepherd refused to let the past be buried. Scratching at a forgotten door, the dog uncovered a secret that had been hidden for decades, one man's silent sacrifice and a legacy waiting to be finished. What Jack Morgan, a battle-tested Army medic, discovered in that hidden workshop would shatter everything he believed about love, loss, and family. This isn't just a story about death, it's about what survives in silence. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? The call came just after sunrise, piercing through the quiet rhythm of Jack Morgan's morning. He was in the garage of his small rented apartment outside Richmond, Virginia, hands gripping a pull-up bar, arms straining upward in slow, methodical movements. At 32, Jack's frame bore the signs of a life built on endurance more than vanity. Lean shoulders, wiry muscles, a stillness born from long hours of waiting in silence for something to break. When his phone buzzed against the workbench below, he dropped down, boots hitting the concrete with a steady thud, and swiped the screen. "Mr. Morgan?" "This is Marjorie Delaney from Delaney & Sons Funeral Home in Chatham." Her voice carried the kind of gentleness honed by decades of guiding families across the thin ice of grief. Jack remembered her vaguely, a tall woman with a silver bob, narrow shoulders, and spectacles always resting low on her nose. She had presided over his grandmother's service years ago, speaking with care, never rushing words. "It's your grandfather, Thomas Morgan." "He passed last night." Peacefully, Jack steadied one hand on the bench. The words didn't crash down like a storm. They settled, heavy and inevitable, like the tide. His grandfather had been a figure of granite, stern, weathered, a lighthouse keeper whose silence could swallow whole rooms. Jack had not been back to Cape Cod in 15 years, not since a teenage fight had driven him away. "Arrangements?" His voice was even, clipped, the voice of a medic accustomed to dealing with wounds that could not afford emotion. "There will be a small service. The Lighthouse Society has asked to speak. He left a letter here, for you only." Jack felt a strange tightening in his chest, as if a lock had turned. "I'll drive up," he said, and ended the call. From the corner of the garage, a shape rose from a folded blanket. Scout, his German shepherd, padded forward. 6 years old, 68 pounds, his sable coat was banded in shades of gray and black, his muzzle dusted with white. Amber eyes shone with alertness, ears erect, one nicked from an old injury. He carried himself with the calm discipline of a veteran. Once he had worked in a National Guard search and rescue unit, pulling survivors from wreckage, his nose mapping worlds humans couldn't see. Now he was Jack's closest companion, loyal and unyielding. "Scout," Jack murmured. The dog sat at his boots, silent, watchful. "Road trip?" Jack added. He scratched the dog's neck, and Scout's tail tapped once against the concrete. Acknowledgement without excitement. Packing was swift, precise. Jack moved through the apartment like a man rehearsing evacuation. 2 flannel shirts, heavy boots, work jeans, and a medical kit, rolled tight. He paused at the bookshelf, fingers brushing against the old man and the sea, before sliding it into his duffel. Rituals mattered. By mid-morning, he had the truck loaded. Scout leapt into the passenger seat, circling once before lying down, his head resting against the dashboard, eyes already fixed ahead. The drive stretched out long and gray. Jack drove with soldier's precision, hands steady, gaze shifting from road to mirror, cataloging without thought. Silence filled the cab, broken only by the hum of tires and Scout's slow breathing. Cape Cod existed in Jack's memory as a collage of salt and silence, his grandfather's profile against Nauset light. Summers when silence weighed more heavily than reprimand. and that night of his teenage mistake, tires screeching, metal twisting, and the ride home in a silence more unbearable than fury. He had left soon after, at 17, angry and raw. By 20, he was in uniform, finding in the Army what he had lacked at home: commands, clarity, the absence of silence. At a gas station outside Hartford, Jack stopped for fuel. The attendant was young, maybe 18, acne scattered across his cheeks, a Red Sox cap pulled low. His name tag read Jason. "Big dog," Jason said, nodding toward Scout, who sat upright in the cab, amber eyes trained on him. "Good dog," Jack replied. Jason smiled, crooked and boyish. "My granddad had a beagle. Used to steal hot dogs right off the grill." He laughed, shaking his head. "Mom still complains." Jack gave a small nod. It was nothing, a fragment of conversation, but it warmed the air for a heartbeat. He paid, returned to the truck, and Scout leaned subtly against his leg as if sealing the moment away. By noon, the Sagamore Bridge loomed. Jack cracked the window, and the salt smell rolled in. Brine, seaweed, rope, the whole vocabulary of the Cape. Scout rose, paws braced on the dash, nose twitching in sharp bursts. His tail gave a single, steady beat. For him, the scent was recognition. For Jack, it was the weight of everything unresolved. The funeral home was next. Delaney and Son stood in Chatham, clapboards painted a fading blue, its windows shaded by lace curtains. Inside, lilies scented the air. Marjorie Delaney appeared from a side room, tall, thin, hair neatly parted silver. Age had carved her face, but her pale eyes were soft. She reached for Jack's hands with cool fingers. "I'm so sorry, Jack," she said. He nodded. Scout sat at his heel, watching her, tail brushing the floor once in quiet acknowledgment. Marjorie handed him a plain envelope. "Your grandfather left this in February. Said it was for you, only Jack slipped it into his jacket pocket. The paper seemed to weigh more than it should, but he didn't open it. Not yet." They spoke briefly of the service. 2 days later, a small gathering, old lighthouse keepers with driftwood faces who would speak of tides and storms. Marjorie promised she would handle the details. Before he left, she bent to stroke Scout's head, and the dog accepted with quiet dignity. The road to the house wound past dunes and scrub pine, gulls crying overhead. The ocean revealed itself, restless and gray, waves battering the shore. The house stood on the bluff as it always had, 2 stories of weathered shingles, its porch sagging slightly, its windows staring out like tired eyes. It looked less like a home than a fortress, waiting out the years. Jack parked beneath the old spruce tree. Its branches swayed in the wind, whispering. He sat for a moment, staring at the house. Scout tilted his head, amber eyes fixed on him. "All right," Jack said finally, and stepped out. The key was still where it had always been, under the second board of the porch step. He lifted it, slid it into the lock, and turned. The door groaned open, releasing a draft of cold air tinged with dust and sea. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and salt, layered with time. The braided rug was still in the living room, the sagging couch still pressed against the wall. Bookshelves bowed with fishing manuals and navigation charts. On the mantel stood a photograph. Thomas Morgan, shoulders squared, face set against Nauset light. Jack dropped his duffel by the door. He scanned the room with the trained gaze of a medic, cataloging details without emotion. Every object told a story. Every absence spoke louder. Scout padded across the room, nose to the floor, exploring. He sniffed the corners, paused near the couch, then circled once before settling. The dog's presence steadied the silence. Jack took out a small notebook and wrote, "Call realtor. Sort belongings. Keep photographs. Sell tools. 3 days." He snapped the book shut. 3 days. It was enough. He would bury the past, settle what needed to be settled, and walk away. That evening he made a sandwich in the small kitchen, ham and mustard, nothing more. He ate at the table, the same one that had once hosted family meals conducted in silence. When he finished, he washed the plate thoroughly, almost obsessively, then dried it and set it carefully back in the cupboard. He pulled the envelope from his pocket, stared at it, then slid it into the hallway drawer. Some truths could wait. The silence of the house pressed around him, but he pushed it back. 3 days. That was all. Morning broke with a pale light that seeped through the salt-streaked windows of the old house. Jack woke early, as he always did, body tuned to the rhythm of military habit. He pulled on a flannel shirt and jeans, washed his face in the cold water that sputtered reluctantly from the bathroom faucet, and brewed black coffee in the chipped percolator his grandfather had left behind. The bitter aroma filled the kitchen, grounding him for a moment. Scout was already awake, lying by the door with his head on his paws. When Jack moved, the dog rose fluidly, stretching his long body before padding over. His amber eyes fixed on his master, tail giving one deliberate thump against the floorboards. He seemed ready, as if he too understood that today was the start of the mission. Jack laid out his plan in the notebook. Operation Clean Sweep. 1 room at a time, methodical. Nothing sentimental. It was easier to approach it as an assignment rather than a return. He started in the living room, pulling faded curtains from rods, boxing up knickknacks, sorting stacks of worn manuals and maps. Dust rose with each movement, catching in the morning light like tiny suspended ghosts. Scout followed him, but unlike the day before, the dog seemed unsettled. His nails clicked against the wood as he paced the perimeter of the room. Every few minutes he would drift toward the hallway that led to the basement door. His ears stood forward, his tail rigid, body taut, with an alertness Jack recognized from deployment, the kind of focus a dog gave when scenting something hidden beneath rubble. "Easy," Jack muttered, without looking up, assuming the dog had caught a trace of mice or damp mold. But Scout didn't settle. He returned again and again to the same spot, the narrow door at the end of the hallway that led down to the basement. He sniffed along the frame, pressed his nose into the crack at the bottom, and let out a low whine. Jack stopped dusting and frowned. "There's nothing down there," he said firmly. Scout ignored the command. He pawed at the wood, claws scraping softly. The sound echoed faintly in the silent house, stirring something Jack tried to push away. He continued with his task, filling a cardboard box with old photographs, but Scout's persistence grew. The dog scratched again, whining louder now, and then circled back, pressing his head against Jack's hip as if to nudge him toward the door. Jack sighed. "You've gone stubborn on me, haven't you?" Scout met his eyes, ears pricked, expression urgent. Jack knew that look. It was the same expression the dog had given in ruined warehouses overseas when he had scented a survivor trapped beneath broken beams. Jack had learned to trust that signal. It had meant life or death more than once. He set down the box and walked into the hallway. The basement door loomed ahead, its brass knob dull with age. Jack placed his hand on it, felt the chill of metal, and twisted. The hinges groaned in protest as the door swung inward. A wave of cold air rolled out, musty and damp, carrying with it the scent of earth and mildew. The staircase beyond was steep, wooden steps dark with age, worn smooth in the middle from decades of boots. Jack clicked on the heavy flashlight he'd brought from the truck and shone the beam downward. Dust motes swirled in the cone of light. Scout pressed forward, eager, but Jack blocked him with a hand. "Stay close," he ordered. Together they descended, the stairs creaking under their combined weight. The basement was just as he remembered. Stone foundation walls slick with moisture, piles of fishing nets collapsed in corners, lobster traps warped and gray, coils of rope stiff with age. The smell of rust and damp wood filled the space. "See?" "Just junk," Jack muttered. But Scout wasn't listening. The dog moved with intent, nose low, tail stiff. He bypassed the nets and traps, heading straight for the far wall. Jack followed reluctantly, shining the beam. The wall was paneled with rough pine planks, darker with age than the rest of the room. Against it leaned rusted tools, a gaff hook, a dented buoy, and a stack of stiff coiled rope. Scout shoved his nose into the narrow seam where two boards met and whined again, louder this time. Then he pawed, claws clicking sharply against the wood. "Enough," Jack said sharply, but Scout barked once, short and commanding, the kind of bark trained dogs use to signal discovery. Jack froze. Instinct whispered. For 15 years he had trusted this animal's judgment. Scout never wasted energy, never signaled without reason. He stepped closer, set the flashlight on an old crate, and cleared the clutter, moving the hook and buoy aside, dragging the rope coils across the damp floor. They left clean outlines in the dust, marking how long they had lain undisturbed. Now the wall was bare. Jack ran his hand over the planks. The surface was rough, splintered in places, nails rusted deep into the grain. He balled his fist and knocked. The sound that came back was not solid. It was hollow, an airy, resonant thump that reverberated in his chest. Jack's eyes widened. He moved his fist a few inches left. This time the sound was firm, dense. To the right, solid again. But in the center, hollow. He straightened, staring at the section of wall. His heartbeat quickened. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Scout barked once more, as if in triumph. Jack looked around the basement, scanning the scattered tools. His gaze settled on a heavy crowbar leaning against a beam, its end flattened from years of use. He gripped it, testing the weight. Back at the wall, he wedged the flat end into the seam and pushed. The wood groaned but held. He repositioned, added more force, and a nail screeched as it tore free. The plank shifted outward an inch, dust billowing from the crack. Scout whined eagerly, pressing forward, tail low, but wagging in. Tension! Jack worked down the seam, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill. Another nail gave way, then another. Finally, with a wrenching pull, the entire section of planks swung inward like a door. The sound echoed through the basement, a final groan of surrender. Behind it yawned a black rectangle, a hidden passage carved into the foundation itself. The air that drifted out was different, drier, carrying the faint scent of sawdust and resin, not the damp mildew of the cellar. Jack stepped back, crowbar still in hand, breathing hard. He stared at the opening, disbelief etched across his face. All those years in this house as a boy, all those summers of silence, and never once had he known this existed. Scout sat at his side now, calm, gaze fixed on the dark gap. His breathing was steady, his body relaxed. Mission accomplished. Jack ran a hand across his jaw, stubble rough beneath his fingers. He couldn't decide if he was angry, curious, or afraid. Maybe all three. He glanced down at Scout, who looked up at him with unblinking eyes, as if to say, "This is why we came back." For a long moment Jack stood there, the crowbar heavy in his grip, the smell of sawdust teasing his senses. Finally he exhaled, the sound loud in the silent basement. "Well," he muttered, "guess we're not leaving in 3 days after all." Jack stood at the threshold of the opening, his breath uneven. The black rectangle carved into the foundation seemed to breathe against him, a pocket of space untouched for decades. The cold damp of the cellar was left behind at the doorway. From within came an entirely different scent, resinous pine, faint cedar, and the sharp tang of linseed oil. It was a workshop's perfume, warm and dry, like stepping into another man's lungs. Scout sat beside him, steady and watchful. His ears twitched forward, his amber eyes calm now, the urgency replaced by quiet certainty. The dog had led him here, and now he seemed to say, This is safe. Go on." Jack ducked through the opening, flashlight beam piercing the dark. After 3 steps along the narrow pine-walled passage, he found a switch on the wall. His fingers hesitated, then flipped it. A single bare bulb hummed to life overhead, bathing the room in a golden glow. He froze. Before him stretched a world he had never known existed. The hidden chamber was not large, but it was meticulously ordered. Along one entire wall, a pegboard held hand tools arranged with military precision: saws, chisels, hammers, each one hanging against a white-painted outline. Every shadow awaited its tool like a soldier called to formation. On a long rack, dozens of wood chisels gleamed, their steel edges catching the light, their wooden handles arranged from largest to smallest in a perfect gradient. Hand planes made of dark rosewood and brass stood in a row, like sculptures. At the center of the room stood a heavy maple workbench, its surface scarred and stained, but wiped clean, ready for the next project. At one end was a cast-iron vise, at the other a set of labeled drawers, their neat handwriting revealing what lay inside: hinges, brass screws, dowels. The orderliness struck Jack deep. He recognized the same discipline he had carried in combat, only here it had been translated into wood. Pinned to a corkboard across the room were detailed drawings, blueprints drafted in a tight, careful script. Jack stepped closer, Scout padding silently at his heel. He lifted one sheet, hands trembling. The lines formed the outline of a small boat, its curves graceful, its keel strong. At the top was written in his grandfather's steady hand, "Little Beacon." The name hit Jack in the chest. He pictured the old lighthouse his grandfather had watched over for years, the red and white tower standing against every storm. The boat, he realized, was meant to carry a piece of that same light. He moved to another drawing, a rocking chair with elegantly curved legs, the joints annotated with numbers and precise notes. Another showed a child's rocking horse with instructions for carving the mane. There were sketches of animals, too: whales, gulls, cod, each drawn with the attention of someone who saw not just their shapes, but their souls. Jack turned slowly, scanning shelves built into the wall. They held the fruits of this secret labor: a carved bird, its wings half spread as if caught in the moment before flight; a set of toy animals, their surfaces sanded smooth, waiting for paint; a wooden box with dovetail joints so intricate it seemed impossible they were shaped by human hands. Jack picked it up. The lid bore an unfinished inlay, dark wood forming the outline of a star. His fingers traced the delicate grooves. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. He set the box down gently, heart hammering. His grandfather, silent, rigid, weathered like the lighthouse stone, had been this: a craftsman, an artist. He had carried beauty in his hands even while his voice had carried so little warmth. Scout sniffed around the room, his nails tapping lightly on the wood floor. He paused by the workbench, nudging something with his nose. Jack crouched, and there it was, a thick, leather-bound book resting on the stool. Its cover was cracked, corners softened from years of handling. There was no title, no decoration, only the feel of something used daily. Jack picked it up, thumb brushing the worn leather. He opened to the first page. The handwriting was his grandfather's, neat and deliberate. May 4th, 1999. Pine too soft for cabinet frames. Oak better, more expensive, but lasting. Mary always preferred Oak Mary, his grandmother. She had died when Jack was 10, leaving the house quieter than it had ever been before. Jack blinked at the page, then turned. The next entry: June 12th, 1999. First dovetail joints for drawers. Hands unsteady, but patience will teach. He flipped again. August 21st, 2002. Repaired Mrs. Gable's chair. Cherry wood, beautiful grain. Feels good to fix something broken. Jack's throat tightened. The entries were written like a craftsman's log, technical and focused. But between the lines there were glimpses of something else. Letters almost. Words that read less like notes to himself and more like messages cast into the silence. September 30th, 2005. Storm coming in from the north. Wind tells a story. Wish you were here to hear it. Mary Jack sat heavily on the stool, the book open in his lap. The words blurred. His grandfather, the man who had always seemed stone and salt, had been talking all along, not to Jack, not to the world, but to Mary, to a woman who was no longer there. Scout pressed his head against Jack's leg, sensing the shift in his master's breathing. Jack laid a hand on the thick fur. He turned more pages. March 5th, 2007. The boy is 13 today. He grows tall, your eyes in him. He asked about the boat engine. I tried, but my words fail me. I never had them. Mary Jack closed his eyes. He remembered that day. He had been awkward, fumbling with tools, his grandfather's gestures sharp, impatient. He had thought it was anger, disapproval. Yet here, in the man's own words, was the truth. Not anger, but inability. A failure to find the words. The silence, Jack realized, had not been condemnation. It had been a wall, a shield, covering a heart too clumsy to speak. He flipped further, heart pounding. December 25th, 2010. First Christmas without him here. Quiet, too quiet. Left the porch light on just in case. He did not come, Jack's breath caught. That had been his first Christmas away in the army. He had been proud to be gone, thinking his absence punished his grandfather. All the while, a light had been waiting for him at home. His chest ached. He pressed a hand over the leather cover, closing the book. The workshop, once alien, now felt alive with presence. The scent of cedar, the gleam of tools, the unfinished toys. They were not just projects. They were language. His grandfather had spoken with chisels and saws, had carved love into wood grain, had hidden tenderness in dovetail joints. Scout lay down by the stool, eyes half-lidded, but still alert. Jack leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The man he had run from was not the man he thought he knew. The stern lighthouse keeper had been, in secret, an artist, a husband who wrote letters to the dead, a grandfather who tried, awkwardly, silently, to reach across the gulf. Jack felt something break inside him, and in its place, something else. Recognition. For years he had believed silence was emptiness. Here, in this secret place, he saw it for what it was. Fullness too heavy to speak aloud. He stood slowly, running his hand along the workbench. His grandfather's fingerprints might still be in the grooves. The half-finished box, the sketches of Little Beacon, the toys. These were not remnants. They were invitations. Jack's voice cracked as he whispered, "Why didn't you show me?" The workshop, of course, gave no answer. Only the golden light hummed softly overhead, and the scent of wood whispered its truth. Scout exhaled, a low sigh as if echoing the answer. You had to find it yourself. The leather-bound book lay open on the workbench, its pages filled with neat, deliberate handwriting. Jack had already read enough to feel his world tilt. Entries that began as technical notes on dovetail joints and varnish had shifted into one-sided conversations with Mary, the grandmother he barely remembered. But something told him there was more buried here, and the soldier in him, the medic who had combed through rubble for survivors, couldn't stop now. He had to dig deeper. Scout stirred beside him, ears flicking as dust motes swirled in the lamplight. The German shepherd's body was tense but steady, lying close, his muzzle resting against Jack's boot. He was 6 years old, but carried himself with the gravity of an elder. His sable coat gleamed in the golden bulb glow, scars on his forelegs hidden beneath thick fur, reminders of collapsed walls and broken glass he had endured. Now his presence was quiet, anchoring. Jack turned the pages carefully, each one brittle with age. He passed years in minutes: 2003, 2004, 2005. The rhythm of the entries was consistent: short notations about Wood, occasional fragments of aching letters to Mary. Then, as he neared the summer of 2006, the handwriting seemed to falter. He slowed. His stomach tightened. August 13th, 2006. Loose board on porch. Needs replacing. He remembered that day. 16, restless, reckless. He had borrowed his grandfather's truck without permission, skidded on rain-slick pavement, and struck another car. Nobody had died, thank God, but hospital bills and damages had towered like storm waves. He had waited for shouting, punishment, some eruption of fury. Instead, there had only been silence, his grandfather driving home with knuckles white against the wheel, jaw set in granite. For years, Jack had carried that silence like a wound, proof that he was a failure, unloved. He flipped to the next page. August 14th, 2006. The page was blank. So was August 15th. And August 16th. Jack's throat constricted. The silence was here, bound in paper, a silence so absolute it had consumed ink itself. His hands trembled as he turned again. Finally, a week later, words returned. August 22nd, 2006. Sold the Sea Star. Have to take care of the boy first. Jack's breath hitched. He blinked, then read again, as if repetition would change the words. Sold the Sea Star. The Sea Star. His grandfather's boat, his pride, the vessel that had carried generations of Morgans into the Atlantic. Jack could still see it, a broad-beamed fishing boat with weathered green trim, nets coiled neatly, the helm shining with oil his grandfather had rubbed into it every season. On that deck, Jack had seen his grandfather's smile, rare, fleeting, but real. The boat had been freedom. It had been identity. And he had sold it. For Jack. Jack fumbled at the back of the book, where a thin flap of leather bulged. He tugged and pulled free a bundle of folded papers. The edges were frayed, creases worn, soft from years of being hidden. His heart hammered as he unfolded the first, a bill of sale, dated August 21st, 2006, for $12,000. Samuel Morgan's signature precise at the bottom. The Sea Star transferred to another man's name. Behind it, more papers. A loan agreement from a credit union, $5,000 borrowed against the house. And then receipts, carbon copies yellowed with time, documenting payments to the Miller family, the people Jack had crashed into that night. Hospital bills, car repairs, legal fees. The final receipt stamped paid in full, $17,000. Jack's eyes blurred. He dropped the stack onto the workbench, papers scattering like dead leaves. His chest constricted as if someone had pressed a hand against his sternum. The silence of that night, the silence he had taken for condemnation, had not been anger at all. It had been sacrifice. His grandfather had sold his kingdom, mortgaged his home, and carried the weight alone so that Jack could be spared. A sound tore from Jack's throat, raw and guttural. He bent forward, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking. For years he had told himself he was unwanted, a burden tolerated. The truth was worse and infinitely more painful. He had been loved more than he had ever imagined, loved in silence at unbearable cost. Scout rose immediately. The German shepherd pressed his weight against Jack's side, strong body firm and grounding. He nosed beneath Jack's elbow, forcing his master's hands away from his face. His amber eyes were steady, warm, filled with that wordless loyalty only dogs possessed. Jack clutched the dog's neck, burying his face in the thick fur. His sobs broke loose, violent and unrestrained, racking him until his body ached. He wept not only for the man he had misunderstood, but for himself, the boy who had wasted 15 years in anger, blind to the truth. The workshop seemed to hold him, the lamplight a gentle cocoon. Every tool on the wall, every blueprint pinned with care, every unfinished carving spoke the words his grandfather had never been able to say aloud. I loved you. I carried you. I gave everything for you. Minutes stretched. His sobs softened to tremors, then to silence, broken only by Scout's rhythmic breathing. Jack leaned back, wiping his face with the heel of his hand. His eyes burned, swollen, but his chest felt hollowed out, scraped clean. The papers lay across the bench, accusing and tender all at once. Jack gathered them with trembling fingers, smoothing the creases, tucking them back into the leather book. His hands lingered on the cover, scarred knuckles tracing the worn spine. He looked at Scout, who sat patiently, tail sweeping once against the floorboards. I thought he hated me, Jack whispered, voice hoarse. All this time. And he was. Saving me. Scout tilted his head, ears twitching, as if he understood. Jack let out a long breath. His grandfather's silence had not been judgment. It had been endurance. It had been the sound of sacrifice too deep for words. The truth pressed down on him, heavy and irrevocable. The house was no longer just a relic of childhood pain. It was a monument to love, silent, hidden, but unbreakable. Jack's hands curled into fists. The soldier in him, the medic who had kept men alive under fire, suddenly felt like a child again, vulnerable, small. He leaned against the workbench, eyes closing, and let the workshop cradle him. Scout lay down beside him, head across Jack's boots, as if standing guard. For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to be guarded. The morning after his breakdown in the workshop, Jack rose later than usual. His eyes were swollen, his head heavy, his body carrying the dull ache of a man who had wrestled with ghosts all night. He brewed coffee in the dented percolator and drank it black, the bitterness a companion to the thoughts circling in his chest. Scout sat near the door, upright, patient. His amber eyes followed Jack's every movement. The German shepherd seemed to know his master was moving in slow time, like a soldier after a battle, exhausted but still needing to march forward. Jack touched the envelope still tucked into the drawer, the one Marjorie Delaney had given him. He hadn't opened it yet. His grandfather's own words on paper were enough for now. But the questions gnawed at him, insistent. Why had the old man kept his love hidden? Why had he endured his silence like a shield? He needed someone who could give him answers. Not paper, not blueprints, not unfinished toys. A living voice. So he drove to Hyannis. The road carried him past weather-beaten clapboard houses, their paint scoured by salt air, and through pine groves that opened suddenly onto water. The harbor came into view in the late morning light, a sprawl of docks and fishing boats rocking against their lines. Gulls wheeled overhead, crying greedily as fishermen unloaded crates of cod and haddock onto the planks. The air smelled of diesel, brine, and bait, familiar, pungent, grounding. Jack parked near the wharf, Scout jumping lightly down from the truck. Together they walked along the docks, boots and paws thudding against the weathered boards. Fishermen glanced up as they passed, some nodding politely, others simply returning to their ropes and nets. At the far end of the pier stood a squat wooden building with a peeling sign, Walt's Tackle and Supply. The letters were faded, but steady. Jack remembered it vaguely from childhood. His grandfather had always stopped here for lines, hooks, and the kind of advice only Walt could give. The bell above the door jingled as Jack stepped inside. The shop smelled of oiled wood, salt, and tobacco. Nets hung from the rafters, spools of rope stacked in corners, rows of lures glittering under dim yellow bulbs. Behind the counter stood a man, bent slightly with age, but still solid, like driftwood polished by years of storms. Walt Henderson was in his late 70s. His frame was sturdy, though his shoulders had curved with time. His face was deeply lined, his jaw square beneath a short white beard. A Red Sox cap was pulled low over a head of thinning silver hair. His eyes were sea-gray, sharp but softened by years of laughter and loss. He wore a faded blue work shirt rolled at the sleeves, exposing forearms knotted with veins, hands rough and scarred from rope burns. When he saw Jack, his expression shifted slowly, first surprise, then recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," Walt said, his voice a gravelly rumble touched with warmth. "Jack Morgan, haven't seen you since you were knee-high to a lobster pot." Jack managed a thin smile. "It's been a while." Scout padded forward, sitting neatly beside Jack's leg, posture alert but calm. Walt's gaze dropped to the dog, and he gave a short whistle. "Fine animal you've got there." "Shepherd, right? Reminds me of your granddad's old mutt. Never left his side either." Jack nodded, resting a hand on Scout's neck. "This is Scout. He's been with me through everything." Walt studied Jack, eyes narrowing slightly. "You've got your father's brow, but the set of your jaw, that's Thomas. Strong as granite, that man. Stubborn, too. Guess it runs in the family." Jack cleared his throat. "I came to ask about him." "About my grandfather. There are things I found, things I didn't understand." Walt leaned on the counter, his hands folded. His expression softened. "I figured you'd show up sooner or later." He always hoped you would. He motioned toward a pair of wooden stools by the window. "Sit. We'll talk proper." Jack sat, Scout lying at his feet. Walt lowered himself onto the opposite stool, his movements deliberate, like a man who measured out his energy carefully these days. "You know," Walt began, "your granddad carried a picture of you in his wallet. The one of you in uniform. Showed it to anyone who stood still long enough. Salesmen, tourists, even the guys who came in for bait. He'd say, 'That's my grandson. Army medic. Best man you'll ever meet.' His chest would puff up like he'd swallowed the whole damn Atlantic." Jack's breath caught. The memory of his grandfather's stone face clashed violently with this image. An old man proudly flashing a photograph to strangers. "He never told me," Jack murmured. Walt shook his head, his beard bristling. "Thomas wasn't much for words." "You know that. He carried his feelings in his hands, not his mouth. Called his workshop his church. Said it was the only place he could breathe. Said when the wood shaved clean under his chisel, he felt closer to Mary than anywhere else on earth." Jack swallowed hard. He could see it now. The tools lined up like parishioners, the workbench and altar, the golden bulb a lone candle. "He was building something, wasn't he?" Jack asked quietly. Walt's eyes brightened, but sadness clouded them too. "Aye, the little beacon. His dreamboat. Not a fishing vessel like the Sea Star. No, this one was for joy. A sleek little thing meant to cut across the bay on calm mornings. He said one day he'd take you out in it, let you hold the tiller, feel the wind. Wanted you to see the sea the way he saw it. Not just hard work, but freedom." Jack closed his eyes. He pictured the blueprint pinned to the corkboard, the elegant curves of a hull that had never touched water. "But his hands," Walt continued, voice lower now, "they betrayed him. Arthritis, bad and cruel. Some mornings he'd come in here, fists swollen like knots of rope. He'd curse under his breath, but he never let me see tears. Said he'd keep carving until the tools dropped out of his grip. But the fine cuts, the delicate work, they slipped away from him. The beacon stayed unfinished." The silence that followed was heavy. Jack stared down at his own hands, strong and steady, capable of stitching wounds, of holding a rifle, of breaking open hidden doors. They looked so different from the trembling lines Walt described. "He never spoke of it," Jack said. "No," Walt replied, shaking his head. "Thomas wasn't a man to share weakness. But I'll tell you this, son, he wasn't silent because he didn't care. He was silent because he cared too damn much and didn't know how to show it." Jack felt his throat tighten again. He remembered the blank pages in the journal, the receipts documenting a sacrifice made for him, the porch light left on at Christmas. All of it was love, just written in a language he hadn't known how to read. Scout shifted, pressing closer against Jack's leg. The dog's presence was steady, grounding him against the tide of emotions rising inside. Walt reached behind the counter and pulled out a flask, dented and polished from years of use. He unscrewed the cap, took a small sip, then handed it across. "He'd want you to know the truth, Jack? That's why I'm telling you. He was proud of you." Always was. Jack took the flask, tasted the burn of whiskey, and handed it back. His voice was hoarse. "Thank you, Walt." "I needed to hear that." The old man nodded, his sea-gray eyes steady. "Then carry it with you. Finish what he couldn't. That's the best way to honor him." Jack rose slowly, Scout following suit. He clasped Walt's hand, feeling the strength still in the old fisherman's grip. Then he stepped outside into the salty air of the harbor. Boats creaked against their moorings, gulls wheeled, and the horizon stretched endless and gray. For the first time since his return, Jack felt the faint stirrings of direction. Not the mission of a soldier, not the bitterness of a runaway, but the quiet responsibility of a grandson who finally understood the depth of his inheritance. The harbor still echoed in Jack's ears as he drove back along the coastal road. Walt's words had carved themselves into him. He carried your picture. He called his workshop his church. The little beacon was meant for you. The truth was no longer something hidden in papers or silence. It was spoken now, a living witness stamped into his memory. Scout sat upright in the passenger seat, head turned toward the salt-scoured windows. His ears twitched with every sound of the sea, the cry of gulls, the thrum of distant engines, the rush of wind through the dunes. He was a sentinel, as he had always been, guarding Jack not from enemies, but from the danger of retreating into his own blind sorrow. When Jack pulled into the gravel drive, the old house stood as it had before, gray, weathered, its windows dark. But now, instead of looking like a tomb, it looked like a place waiting to be heard. Jack cut the engine, let the silence wash over him, and stepped out. The evening light painted the horizon in bruised purples and streaks of gold. The Atlantic breathed below the bluff, waves rolling steady as a heartbeat. Jack walked through the door, his boots loud on the floorboards, Scout's paws steady behind him. He didn't stop in the living room or the kitchen. His path was set. The basement door creaked as he pulled it open. The musty air of the cellar met him, but it no longer felt suffocating. He descended, the crowbar marks still raw on the planks he had pried loose days before. Scout slipped past him, nose twitching, tail straight, and padded through the hidden passage without hesitation. Jack followed. The single bulb flickered to life when he hit the switch. The workshop glowed again, warm, golden, alive with his grandfather's presence. The order of tools on the wall, the clean workbench, the smell of wood and linseed, it all seemed to lean toward him, urging him not to abandon it. And then he saw it. In the corner, half shrouded by a heavy canvas tarp, was something larger than the toys and furniture. Jack strode over, hands tugging at the cloth, and pulled it away. A hull. The skeleton of a small boat stretched across a pair of wooden stands. Its ribs were elegant arcs of oak, the keel a dark line running proud and true. The frame was unfinished, raw in places, but even in its incompleteness, it carried grace. Beside it leaned a mast, still rough-hewn, its surface bearing shallow carved lines. Jack stepped closer, tracing his hand along the grain. Near the top, half-formed, was the outline of a lighthouse. The details, the windows, the railing, the tiny glow of its beacon, had never been cut. Scout circled the hull once, then settled directly beneath the mast, his great body stretched out on the floor. He placed his chin on his paws, eyes fixed on Jack, tail still. He looked like a guard posted to keep watch over sacred ground. Jack's chest tightened. Walt's words echoed again. He wanted to take you out in her, wanted you to see the sea the way he saw it. He sat on the stool, elbows braced on his knees, staring at the unfinished boat. His mind raced with arguments. He could still leave. He could box up the tools, sell the property, escape the burden. He had already given 15 years of his life to a war that left him with scars no one could see. Why chain himself to wood and ghosts? But his heart refused. Every dovetail, every careful drawing, every unfinished carving was a message. The little beacon wasn't just a boat. It was a promise, a conversation that had been cut short. And now the tools waited, not for his grandfather, but for him. Jack rose and walked to the pegboard. His fingers hovered over the chisels, the planes, the saws. They were lined up like soldiers, waiting for command. He selected a chisel, its handle worn smooth by his grandfather's grip. He held it up to the light, feeling the ghost of another hand guiding his own. He moved back to the mast. The lighthouse outline glowed faintly beneath the lamplight. He placed the chisel against the wood, his left hand steadying, his right hand lifting the mallet. He drew a breath, tasting resin and salt. The mallet struck. A clean curl of wood peeled away. The sound was soft, sharp, final. The first word of a language he had never spoken. Another strike, another curl. The window of the lighthouse began to emerge, square and true. Jack's throat burned. With each cut, he whispered silently to the man who had raised him, "I'm sorry. I see you now." "Thank you." Hours passed. The lamplight swayed slightly as the night deepened, but Jack did not stop. The rhythm of mallet and chisel steadied his breathing, calmed the chaos inside him. His hands, trained for sutures and bandages, now learned another art. He was not just repairing wood, he was repairing himself. Scout remained beneath the mast, watching, occasionally lifting his head to track Jack's movements. When Jack paused, the dog nudged his leg once, as if reminding him not to falter. At last Jack lowered the tools, sweat on his brow, his shirt damp against his back. The lighthouse stood half-formed but clearer than before, the lines precise, the windows clean. He touched the smooth surface with reverence. He whispered aloud this time, his voice breaking in the quiet workshop. "I'm not leaving. Not this time." The words felt heavier than any oath he had spoken in uniform. They were not orders, not vows to a flag or a unit. They were a grandson's promise to a man who had carved love into silence. He turned, eyes sweeping across the workshop, the toys, the blueprints, the neatly hung tools. This was not a place to be abandoned. This was a language waiting to be learned, a bond waiting to be finished. He imagined mornings filled with the smell of sawdust, evenings when the golden bulb glowed like a candle, nights when he would carve and plane and sand until the silence no longer hurt, but healed. Cape Cod would not just be a grave. It would be home. Scout rose, stretched, and pressed against his side, tail wagging once, steady and firm. Jack smiled faintly, running a hand through the thick fur. "We're staying, boy," he said. "We're going to finish it." The Atlantic roared outside, steady as a heartbeat, as if the sea itself approved. Winter had held Cape Cod in its iron grip for months. Snow crusted the shingles of the Morgan house, ice sheathed the bare branches of the pines, and the Atlantic thrashed the rocky shore with endless gray fury. Yet, within the hidden workshop beneath the house, warmth lived. Every day Jack descended the narrow passage with Scout at his heels. The German shepherd, broad-shouldered, sable coat thick against the cold, had found his place curled near the stove Jack had salvaged and coaxed back to life. He watched with keen amber eyes as Jack worked, sometimes rising to nudge his master's arm, as if reminding him to pause and breathe. Jack's hands changed that winter. Where once they had known sutures and field dressings, now they grew calloused and strong, shaped by the rhythm of mallet and chisel, plane and saw. His lean frame, hardened by years in uniform, softened into something steadier, grounded. The haunted lines around his eyes eased. At 32, for the first time in years, he felt not like a man running, but like a man building. Neighbors from the village stopped by occasionally, curious about the faint glow in the old house or the thrum of tools at odd hours. One of them, Clara Jennings, a widow in her late 60s with white hair coiled in a bun and a sharp wit softened by kindness, brought him baskets of bread and jars of chowder. Clara had known Thomas Morgan well. "You sound just like him down there," she had said with a smile, her pale blue eyes misting. The hammer, the saw, music to him. It's good to hear it again. Jack had only nodded, throat thick, but her words settled deep. Through blizzards and long nights, he worked. The little beacon rose slowly out of timber and drawings, her ribs strong, her hull sealed tight, her mast polished until it gleamed. And when Jack reached the unfinished carving, the lighthouse etched faintly at its base, he bent over it with the patience of prayer. Scout lay beneath the mast every night, head resting against his paws, as if guarding the beacon until it shone. By spring, the snow melted. Grass fought its way up through thawing earth, and the salt marshes began to hum with life again. Jack stood one morning in the workshop, sleeves rolled, sawdust on his hair, and stared at the boat resting proud on her supports. The little beacon was complete. Her hull curved with grace, her mast crowned with the carved lighthouse now detailed and shining. The little windows, the railing, even the suggestion of light in the carved grain. Finished at last. His chest ached, but not from sorrow. It was pride, his grandfather's and his own, woven together across time. The day of the launch came clear and cold, the sky streaked with coral and silver. Jack hitched the trailer and drove to Pleasant Bay, Scout standing tall in the truck bed, ears pricked, tail brushing lightly against the rail. The bay was still that morning, the water a sheet of glass, gulls circling lazily overhead. A few fishermen were already there, unloading gear. Among them was Eddie Martinez, a wiry man in his 40s with sun-browned skin and a quick smile. Eddie wore a wool cap pulled low over dark curls, his weathered hands scarred from decades of nets. He had known Jack's grandfather, too. "Thought I'd never see that hull finished," Eddie called, eyes widening as Jack backed the trailer down the ramp. "By God, she's a beauty." Jack smiled faintly, his jaw tight with emotion. He called her the little beacon. Eddie nodded, whistling low. "Fitting name. Thomas always said every man needs a light to steer by. Looks like you found yours." With Eddie's help, and with Scout bounding around the dock like a pup, the boat slid into the water. She floated steady, her reflection rippling gold in the early light. Jack steadied her by the rope, heart thundering as though he'd set a piece of his grandfather free. He climbed aboard, Scout leaping effortlessly after him, paws thudding against the deck. The dog trotted forward to the bow, ears high, stance proud, as if announcing himself as first mate. Jack set his hand on the mast. The carved lighthouse caught the rising sun, the wood glowing as though lit from within. The beam of dawn struck it, and for a moment Jack could almost believe his grandfather's hand rested over his own. The little beacon cut across the calm water. Jack let the tiller guide him, the boat answering true, her frame humming with life. Scout stood tall at the bow, nose to the wind, and suddenly let out a sharp bark that carried across the bay. The sound was clear, defiant, triumphant, a roll call, a declaration. Jack laughed, the sound startling in his own ears. He hadn't laughed freely in years, not since before the desert and the silence. As the boat glided, he felt it. He was no longer running. No longer the boy desperate to escape, nor the soldier haunted by battles and by family silence. He was home. When they returned to the dock, Eddie clapped his shoulder, his rough palm warm. "What now, Morgan? Gonna keep her for Sundays, or will we see you out here working with the rest of us?" Jack looked at the house rising in the distance on its bluff, and then back at the boat. "I'm keeping the house," he said, his voice steady, "and the workshop. I'll set up a place for the community, fixing nets, building, teaching if anyone wants to learn. My grandfather built in silence. I won't. Not anymore." Eddie grinned, eyes bright. Thomas would have liked that. He was stubborn, but he wanted this town to stand strong. Guess the apple didn't fall far. Jack smiled, and for once the comparison didn't sting. He and Scout returned home as the sun rose higher, warming the earth. The house, gray and weathered, no longer looked abandoned. It looked like it was waiting. That afternoon, Jack opened the workshop wide, sunlight pouring into the sacred place. He set the tools in order, laid out planks and pinned new drawings to the corkboard, his own hand steady as he sketched ideas for chairs, cradles, even a repair list for Eddie's boat. Scout lay nearby, tail thumping, eyes half closed, a sentinel at rest. For the first time, Jack wasn't afraid of silence. It was no longer emptiness. It was filled with memory, with presence, with a promise made and kept. As dusk fell, he stood outside with Scout at his side. The lighthouse on the point blinked its steady light over the water, guiding ships home. Jack looked at it, then at the house, then at the little beacon resting safe in the bay. The legacy was not gone. It had only waited for him. And now, with every chisel strike, every plane stroke, every laugh shared with neighbors who wandered by, Jack would carry it forward, turning his grandfather's silent love into something solid, useful, enduring. A beacon not just for him, but for others. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not thunderclaps from the heavens, but quiet gifts hidden in wood, in silence, in love too deep for words. Jack thought he had returned only for a funeral, but God had prepared for him a new beginning, one carved patiently by his grandfather's hands, waiting like a beacon for the day he came home. In our daily lives, we all carry burdens, regrets, or silences that feel too heavy. But perhaps, if we look closely, we'll see that even in silence, God's grace is working, shaping us, guiding us, redeeming what we thought was lost. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below with your own story of silent love or faith, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so these tales of grace and loyalty can reach more hearts. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may His light, like the little beacon, guide you safely home.